This happened to me back in 2020. The world was shutting down because of COVID, and everyone was cooped up in their homes. I've always been an avid backpacker and camper, so I used the lockdown as an excuse to travel to different national parks and camp out in remote places. One of those places was a small creek in Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. Without giving away too much personal information, I'll just say that something happened with my job back in 2019. A mistake I made caused a lot of people to lose money. The backlash was brutal. I had to change apartments, get a new phone number, and eventually quit my job. For months afterward, I was harassed by random phone numbers, some sending me vile messages, and others even making threats. I couldn't tell if it was a group of people or just one very determined person cycling through different numbers. But after a while, it all seemed to stop. Grateful for the quiet, I figured people had lost interest and moved on. I wasn't working at the time and needed a break from the stress of my life, so I loaded up my truck and headed for the Rockies. It was a 3-hour drive. When I arrived, I parked at the base of the trailhead and hiked up to the creek. There wasn't a soul in sight. That didn't surprise me. This was early in the pandemic when people were terrified to leave their homes, and besides, it was still winter. A thin layer of snow blanketed the ground, and every step I took made that loud, crunching sound. After a while, I reached the creek. It wasn't frozen over. Water still flowed steadily through, and the sound was incredibly peaceful. This was the detox I'd been craving. I found a small clearing a little ways off the main trail and set up camp. I chopped some wood, built a fire, and cooked sausages over my small camping stove. Then I settled in by the fire with a book. As the sun disappeared and darkness crept over the woods, I flicked on my headlamp. To unwind, I rolled a joint and started smoking, enjoying the solitude. But then my phone buzzed. Surprised, I pulled it from my jacket pocket. Apart from my family, no one really texts me anymore. It was an unknown number. I froze when I read the first message. "How's the camping going, buddy?" My chest tightened. The next text came seconds later. "It's beautiful out here." And then a third. "I see why you came all the way up here." The weed in my system didn't help my spiraling anxiety. I spun around in a full circle, scanning the woods in every direction with my headlamp. Nothing but snow and trees. My heart thudded in my chest as I typed back. "Who is this?" If the first message had been friendly and vague, I might have assumed it was a family member. But these texts, they felt wrong. The minutes dragged on with no reply. I unzipped my pack and pulled out my handgun. It wasn't that I wanted to use it, but holding it made me feel a little safer. The fire outside was still crackling, and the flickering light made eerie shadows dance across the tent walls. I decided against putting the fire out. The thought of being in complete darkness was too much. So I crawled into my sleeping bag and tried to distract myself by watching YouTube videos. Murder documentaries of all things. Not the best choice given my current situation. Then my phone buzzed again. A reply. "Doesn't matter anymore." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I typed back frantically. "How did you know I'm camping?" No response. Just silence. The firelight outside dimmed as the flames slowly died. I strained my ears in stillness, and then, crunch. Footsteps. Deliberate. Heavy. Getting closer. I gripped my gun tighter, flicking the safety off. The sound stopped. Whoever it was, they were right outside my tent. Then, a sudden flash of light illuminated the thin nylon walls. Like someone had shown a flashlight at me. Or worse, taken a photo. I froze. A moment later, the footsteps began again, retreating this time. My phone buzzed. A photo appeared on my screen. It was my tent, glowing faintly from the firelight outside. Another message followed. "Have a good night's sleep." Adrenaline surged through me, cutting through my high like a knife. I unzipped the tent, stood up, and fired 2 warning shots into the air. The sharp cracks echoed through the forest. I heard frantic footsteps crunching through the snow, fading fast into the distance. "Keep running," I yelled into the darkness, my voice shaking with rage and fear. I climbed back into the tent, my hands still gripping the gun. No more footsteps. No more texts. The silence returned. I didn't sleep for hours. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted off. When I opened my eyes to sunlight the next morning, I felt a wave of relief, so intense I almost cried. Whoever was out there wasn't ready for me to pull a gun. I don't exactly look like the type to own one. That night was the first and only time I've ever fired it. It's been almost 5 years now, and I haven't received another text or felt like I was being watched. But I'll never forget the sound of those footsteps in the snow or the photo of my tent in the middle of the night. During my childhood, every year in October, my family had a tradition of spending a long weekend up in northern Michigan. My uncle Rick owned a 4-acre property out there. The house was big, 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, easily enough space for the whole family. 2 of the bedrooms were set up for all of us kids. My brother and sister, Ben and Laura, shared one room. Meanwhile, our 4 cousins, Sam, Alex, Ryan, and Eli, had another room to themselves. The remaining bedrooms were for all the parents. Uncle Rick was a big outdoorsman. He loved hunting and fishing and often went on camping trips around the country. My dad had even tagged along on a few of his adventures, though he himself was more of an animal lover and never really cared for hunting. Part of Uncle Rick's land was a dense forest. He had painted red marks on certain trees to show where his property ended. Beyond that, nothing but county-owned forest for miles. The nearest house in that direction was probably a good 5 or 6 miles away. One afternoon during that trip, me, my brother Ben, and 2 of our cousins, Ryan and Eli, came up with what seemed like an amazing idea. While our dads talked about hunting at lunch, we decided we wanted to camp out in the woods that night. Our dads, already a couple drinks deep, grinned and said, "Sure, why not?" Our moms, on the other hand, weren't thrilled. They tried to talk us out of it, saying we were too young to be out in the woods alone. But our dads just laughed it off, promising them we'd be fine. Uncle Rick and my dad even joked that we'd be close enough for them to hear our screams if anything went wrong. That didn't sound very comforting. Later that afternoon, they led us deep into the woods, carrying a big tent and flashlights. Laura and our girl cousins didn't come. It was just us boys. As we walked further in, Eli, the youngest at 9 years old, started complaining it was too far. The dads chuckled and teased him, saying, "This is the perfect spot for some real adventure." Eventually, we crossed the property line and found a small clearing surrounded by moss-covered ground. Uncle Rick called it a deer bed and told us it was the perfect place for a campsite. They showed us how to set up the tent, though they made sure we helped instead of letting them do all the work. By the time it was up and ready, we laid out our sleeping bags inside. The tent was big enough for 4 kids to sleep in comfortably. Afterward, we all hiked back to the house together and played outside until dinner. At the dinner table, our moms once again voiced their concern about us camping out there. But our dads waved them off, insisting we'd be fine. Around sunset, Dad and Uncle Rick grabbed flashlights and led us back into the woods, carrying extra blankets to keep us warm through the cold night. Before leaving, I stuffed my backpack with snacks and a deck of Uno cards. Once we were settled in the tent, Dad and Uncle Rick headed back to the house. That's when we realized just how far into the woods we really were. No lights from the house were visible. It was pure darkness beyond the glow of our flashlights. We arranged the lights in a circle and started playing Uno. It was actually a lot of fun, and the time passed quickly. But then, a scream. It echoed faintly from somewhere out in the woods. We all froze, the Uno cards slipping from our hands. It sounded like a girl's scream. I remembered that foxes sometimes make high-pitched screams that sound eerily human, so I told everyone that's probably what it was. It seemed to calm everyone down, especially Eli, who had gone pale. We went back to our game. I even won a couple of rounds, and before long, everyone was laughing again. But then it happened again. This time the scream was much louder and closer. We fell silent. No one said a word as we stared at each other in wide-eyed terror. Even I couldn't shake the unease this time. I whispered, "Turn off your flashlights." We crawled into our sleeping bags and sat in the darkness, hoping to make ourselves invisible. Running back to the house crossed all our minds, but none of us dared. The fear of being chased through the woods was worse than staying put. And then, crunch, the sound of rapid footsteps through the leaves. Whatever it was getting closer. Then silence. We barely had time to breathe before an ear-piercing scream ripped through the air. So close it felt like it was right outside the tent. The entire tent shook violently. Eli started sobbing. Ryan and Ben screamed in terror. I shouted, "Get out! Get out! Run!" I yanked the zipper open, and one by one, we bolted from the tent into the blackness of the woods, flashlights bouncing wildly as we sprinted. Every step felt like a nightmare. Branches snagged at our clothes, and it felt like something was just behind us, reaching out to grab us. We didn't stop running until we burst out of the woods onto the edge of the property, screaming our lungs out. Our parents were already outside, drawn by the sound. We collapsed into their arms, shaking and gasping for breath. When we told them about the screams and the tent shaking, they went pale. I immediately accused Dad and Uncle Rick of sending one of the girls to scare us. But they shook their heads and led us inside, where Laura and our girl cousins were already asleep in their beds. Dad and Uncle Rick grabbed rifles and went out into the woods to search. They came back empty-handed. The next morning, we went back to collect our things. The tent was still there, but seeing it in daylight made my stomach churn. We never camped out in those woods again. In fact, after dark, none of us kids played outside at all. To this day, none of us know what or who was out there that night. What I'm about to tell you still makes me question what's real and what's not. This happened to my dad and me 2 years ago, and even now I get chills just thinking about it. I know how it sounds. If I were you, I probably wouldn't believe it either. But I swear to you, every word of this is true. 2 years ago, my dad and I went on one of our usual camping trips. We both loved getting away from the chaos of everyday life and escaping into the quiet of the outdoors. This place in particular was beautiful. Rolling hiking trails, a river for fishing, even zip lines, and an old information center. It was touristy during peak seasons, but it also had a deep history. We knew we were camping on land that had once belonged to Native American tribes. It added a certain weight to the air out there. The first night was perfect. Other families were scattered throughout the campground. We could see the glow of their campfires and hear the laughter of kids playing in the distance. It was the kind of peaceful night you go camping for. We roasted hot dogs, toasted marshmallows, cracked open a couple of beers, and even chatted with a friendly older couple at the neighboring site. But the second night, that's when everything changed. The staff had mentioned earlier in the day that no one else had booked the campground for that night. It would be just us. At first, we thought it sounded amazing. The entire place to ourselves. Peaceful. Serene. We spent the day hiking a few trails, fishing by the river, and even listening to a scary podcast while sitting on a rock near the water. We thought we were being funny, trying to lean into the spooky vibes. By the time the sun started setting, we were tired in that good way you get after spending all day outside. We stopped at the park's little information center to charge our phones and grab some snacks before heading back to camp. The walk back felt different. The woods felt heavier somehow. The air was thick, and the sky had this strange tint to it, like twilight, didn't want to fade into darkness. Doesn't this feel off? Like we're in some weird dream? My dad asked suddenly. And he was right. It did feel off. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, even though we'd walked this trail earlier in the day. I could feel my chest tightening, and every few steps, I found myself glancing over my shoulder. I couldn't shake the sense that we weren't alone. We didn't talk much after that. Once we made it back to camp, we tried to keep things normal. Neither of us said anything about the weird feeling. We didn't need to. It was like we silently agreed to just pretend everything was fine. We roasted more marshmallows, played music on my phone, and even shared a little weed to try and relax. But as the sun dipped below the trees and the last light faded, That uneasy feeling grew into something much darker. Around 9 p.m., as we sat by the fire making s'mores, there was a noise. A loud bang. It was sharp, sudden, like a tree snapping in half. We both froze, our heads whipping in the direction of the sound. It came from the woods near the river, maybe 100 yards away. We grabbed our flashlights and aimed them toward the trees, but there was nothing. No movement, no glowing animal eyes. "Bigfoot," my dad said with a nervous laugh, trying to lighten the mood. I chuckled too, but it didn't feel funny. Minutes passed. Then it came again. Bang, louder this time. Farther away, but still close enough that the sound made my skin crawl. We shined our lights again. The beams cut through the darkness, but seemed to get swallowed up by the woods. Then a third bang. This one was closer. And that's when fear hit. Whatever it was moving toward us, circling us. We barely had time to process before a fourth bang cracked through the woods. This one so close I swear I felt in my chest. My dad turned to me, his eyes wide. "Get in the tent," he whispered. We scrambled to throw the last of the firewood onto the flames, hoping the light would keep whatever it was at bay. Then we crawled into the tent, leaving everything else outside. I dove into my sleeping bag and lay flat, trying to stay quiet. My dad followed, clutching the only weapon we had, a small camping knife. Useless, really, but it was better than nothing. Then came the vibration. It started low, like a hum, but it wasn't just sound. It was a feeling. It filled the air around us and pressed into our chests, making it hard to breathe. "You hear that?" my dad whispered. I couldn't answer. I just nodded, too scared to make a sound. The hum lasted for what felt like forever. Then another noise, something guttural, alien-sounding. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. The closest thing I can compare it to is that creature from Stranger Things. We stayed frozen, barely daring to breathe. I was too scared to even peek out the small mesh window beside me. And then, everything went black. Neither of us remembers falling asleep. But when we woke up, we were lying flat on our backs in the middle of the tent. My dad was still gripping the knife, like he hadn't moved all night. Our phones, both of which had been fully charged, were completely dead. We stepped outside to pee, standing back to back as we scanned the woods with what little courage we had left. It was still pitch black. The food on the table was untouched. The firewood we'd thrown on the flames was reduced to cold ashes, as if hours had passed. The air felt wrong, like we didn't belong there. We didn't say much as we packed up the campsite. Not until we were back in the car and halfway down the road did my dad finally break the silence. "Whatever that was, it wasn't human," he said quietly. I nodded because I already knew. Whatever happened that night, it wasn't natural. We haven't gone camping since, and I don't think we ever will.